and let us all do we can to build a better future.
Folks, I am concerned about the future of media, but again, we have to remember, thanks to the Telecom Act that was signed under good old Bill Clinton, where corporations and venture capitalists can basically buy up journalism, media. I mean, here in the United States, we have 6 corporations that control all the media.
92%.
92%. Well, there we go. So that's the situation that we have here. And now we're seeing a lot of media outlets, newspaper outlets, firing their staff, their journalists. And all in all, it's impacting a lot of investigative journalists as well. And it's going to severely cripple media as well as the people's trust in media. And I have a follow-up story. Now, this article came out on March 11th, and this is a follow-up story to something that we covered when BuzzFeed bought Huffington Post. So there we go.
Oh, man, I remember that.
Yes, there we go. HuffPost. All right, so, but being serious, given their appalling regularity these days, media layoffs have begun to take on the character of a grim ritual that follows a now all too familiar pattern. With great pomp, a big industry player, media baron, or venture capitalist will announce a bold new merger or acquisition, often promising to rescue a failing venture. Within a few weeks, or sometimes a mere few months, this crispy PR will suddenly give way to the language of hard-headed financial calculus, after which a spat of layoffs invariably follows. In this respect, the devastating closures and layoffs announced earlier this week by the Huffington Post struck quite a few familiar notes. Don't worry, it'll be the last time I'm doing that. Acquired late last year by BuzzFeed. Worth it. The company will not so much be shedding talent as hemorrhaging it. Some 47 jobs being axed across the United States, while Canada's fully bilingual arm will be shuttered altogether, and cuts loom for its staff in Australia. BuzzFeed's 2020 acquisition of the Huffington Post from Verizon Media came barely 5 years after its sale by AOL, which itself purchased the outlet in 2011. Now, again, for all those who don't know this, a lot of these media outlets, such as BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, including Vice, because Vice has its problem, and I want you to go into detail about what's happening with Vice as soon as I'm done with this article, and really the words, the value of journalism and media, because the thing is, what a lot of people think is that a lot of these media outlets are profitable. The sad fact about journalism, independent media, is that it's fast. It has a life of 48 hours, and that's being generous here. That's being generous with journalism and stories. Now, there are certain stories that have a longer life, but I mean, the percentage of that happening is very few. I mean, you know, it's a situation that people don't talk about. And so when these venture capitalists come inside and basically buy these media outlets, you know, they got like a grace period, but if these media outlets don't have a profit, they're done. And then they get bought by somebody, and then they're gutted, and they're no longer the same thing. So a few short months ago, BuzzFeed CEO John Peteri, who last year bought himself an estate in Los Feliz, valued at $5.2 million, was all smiles about the move. I have vivid memories of growing HuffPost into a major news outlet in its early years, he said in a November statement. BuzzFeed is making this acquisition because we believe in the future of HuffPost and the potential it has to continue to define the media landscape for years to come. With the addition of HuffPost, our media network will have more users spending significantly more time with our content than any of our peers. Are you certain about that? Because that's not how things work. Needless to say, the cuts will affect an astonishing roster of skilled and experienced journalists, the circumstances surrounding them being especially cruel, even by industry standards. As journalist Laura Bassett reported, some staff were summoned to a virtual meeting, inexplicably giving the password. Listen to this one, folks. Spring is here. So spring spelled S-P-R, explanation, N-G-I-S, capital H3R3. Only to be informed that layoffs were coming, and then an email, or might not be forthcoming in a few hours regarding their termination. So hey, spring's here. You're fired. Oh wow, that's like a kick in the gut right there. I mean, seriously.
The worst is if they would have been like, guys, if you stay another week, you'll get a bonus, but you're fired now.
Calling the situation a bloodbath, one member of the Huffington Post staff union told Defector, "It's worse than the worst case scenario for what any of us thought we would see when we got this announcement a couple of hours ago." Employees at HuffPost Canada, meanwhile, saw their site shut down suddenly and without warning. That must have been a real nightmare. I mean, imagine going to your website.
I mean, it already happened to Huffington Post once before. This is like you going into a nursing home and like taking out like 20% of the rooms and then coming back later and like taking out most of the rest.
Yep. And again, management insists the layoffs have nothing to do with the successful union drive that concluded 2 weeks ago. So that's oddly suspicious. They get a union happen and then, oh no, we're shutting down shop. Oh no. Okay, so the past 12 months have been especially bad for people employed in the media, with an estimated 28,637 jobs disappearing between January and October of last year. The pandemic notwithstanding, the industry has been hemorrhaging jobs and trending toward further consolidation for quite some time. U.S. newspapers have been having shed roughly 50% of all newsroom employees since 2008. Despite the long-term decline of newspaper jobs, digital and alternative media projects have not really succeeded in making up for those losses, the former experiencing a somewhat negligible uptick before the wave of pandemic layoffs. Needless to say, the industry's weakening capacity to sustain stable or gainful employment has consequences that go far beyond the livelihoods of individual journalists or other employees. Taken as a whole, the landscape of American media is trending towards something increasingly consolidated, centralized, and conglomerate controlled.
I love it. Trending towards. I mean, 92%, not fully trending. Partial trend. 95% trending.
Alt weeklies are practically dead. Gawker and Deadspin are gone. Digital ventures are either struggling or being kicked around like football by media oligarchs. Local news is a desert. The buzzards of organized wealth, meanwhile, are perpetually circling the corpses and picking away at whatever meat remains. As Brendan O'Connor, formerly of Gawker, put it earlier this week, in a decade, all media will be the New York Times and Washington. Oh, God, that's a nightmare. In a decade, all media will be the New York Times and the Washington Post. All the former startups will consolidate into a single Vice feed conglomerate that publishes a quarterly New York magazine and is owned in part by Facebook, and everything else will be Disney or Amazon. This is why we need independent media. And look, for the time being, like, I got to say, I'm so glad we're on Rockfin and Odyssey, because it's not looking good for us on YouTube. And that goes for a lot of other content creators, be they on the left, libertarian, Republican, socialists. Like, this is something that should be concerning everyone. And I know that we don't agree politically on different issues, but everyone should be kind of collectively crapping your pants, because this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen in American media. So I know that there's a lot of people on social media that have different egos and points of view, and they want to fight each other out. You don't have the luxury to fight. And I'm the last person to be a peacemaker or anything like that. But if independent media is eventually going to be deplatformed and censored, we got to look at other alternative platforms. But, you know, it's pointless to get in an argument or have different points. You know, just it's not looking good. That's the end result I want to say. So whatever patterns develop across the media in the years ahead, this week's layoffs make clear that, again, the current model isn't working or enabling a healthy, independent, pluralist media to thrive. Journalists and media professionals will continue to suffer amid further cuts, but so will audience that depend on their reports, opinion writing, and broadcasts. Every round of media layoffs inevitably prompts pleas across the industry for those terminated to be rehired, and with any luck, at least some cut loose from the Huffington Post this week will soon find their feet somewhere else. I hope so too. What they ultimately need, however, is an industry actually capable of supporting their work, one guided by something other than the profits of a tiny few. Ladies and gentlemen, independent media is needed now more than ever. We need to fight for a better future, and it's quite clear that a lot of outlets are being bought out. And the thing is, you know, with Vice, for example, Daniel, can you kind of explain to people what happened with Vice and their little
Vice
situation?
was kind of like vaporware to some extent. They were not telling the truth about their analytics and viewer numbers, and then when they got bought out and they got all their money, they're like, hey, weren't telling the truth. So this is the issue that we have with media all over the country anyway, is that, again, we're just in the same period, the same sort of mindset that we were in the 1920s as we are today, which is media is like this game where, like, whenever we started Heartland's Media, we knew that Heartland's Media was never going to be profitable in, like, the sense of, like, man, we get to do it's supposed to be news. It's supposed to do these things. That's why we have all these other things we're working on the side that help fund what we're doing. If we didn't do that, it'd be very hard for us to be here right now. So this is a situation that is sort of inevitable. The 1996 Telecommunications Act made it so. And now we're watching as we go from thousands of news providers to hundreds and now to dozens. And really 6.
Yeah. So I want to just address something else here too, and this hits home to Chicago. When the pandemic hit us, a lot of studios, radio stations, and we're going to talk about this on the Patreon show too. A lot of places were closed and shut down, or they let their staff go. This is a very serious problem that is going to be impacting us for quite some time. And I said this during 2020, and I'm going to say this now during 2021 because again, we haven't defeated COVID-19. I mean, the numbers are still rising, and yes, people are getting their vaccinations, but please social distance. But if we're able to make it through this, on the one side, this is very good for us, but on the other side, it's going to be a desert. Hard Lens Media might be one of the last independent media networks here in the city of Chicago. And that's a very frightening situation because that means everyone else either went bankrupt or bought out or just closed down shop, or they can barely do whatever they used to do before 2020.
And again, the only reason that we're in it's still a very difficult spot that we're in right now, but we have production end stuff. We have the show. It's working, at least for now.
Yep. And it's also because of you guys, our viewers and subscribers who, again, look, we know times are tough. Just like, comment, share, and subscribe. That helps us out with our algorithm. We appreciate all the support. But that also goes for all your other favorite content creators. And I'm just not talking for independent media because this has bigger consequences. This is going to impact a lot of content creators of all types of genres. This is a sign of things to come, and it's going to get ugly, which is why when Bernie Sanders was saying break the monopolies, notice how fast corporate media was willing to smear him and smear his supporters and everything else. This monopoly that we have is crippling and causing people not to trust the media at all. We need to have real independent media and real journalism, because if we don't, the system will get gross and it will continue to abuse us even further.